everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny post-free agency show, during free agency show. I don't know, just the show the day after the big opening, in which we're going to break down all the various and sundry moves made by Kevin Cheveldayoff heading into the quieter season. Sounds like he's going to still has a lot of work to do on his plate. Not a lot done. I said that clearly earlier, tongue in cheek. But, I mean, I've said this before, whenever anyone asks me about what's gonna happen with the Jets during free agency, and they do year after year, I'll be out at July long weekend in Lactabani, or I'll be on the golf course and someone will say, what are the Jets going to do in free agency? And my answer is always like very little. It's not the style of this team to go address their business in free agency. And usually the moves that they make are the moves that end up being, the under the radar, the kind of players that you have to look up and figure out, who is this guy? I'm not sure who this guy is. I mean, I remember, to be honest with you, I hadn't heard much about Dominic Toninato before he came to the Winnipeg Jets. I hadn't heard, to be honest with you, a lot about Matthew Perreault before he came to the Winnipeg Jets the first time around. So they're usually under the radar moves. Some of them work out very well, the way that Matthew Perreault did. I think the Jets are fairly happy with what they're getting from Dominic Toninato, but this is really not a day where the Jets take big swings. For the most part, they're bunts, right? They're singles down the line. That's what we can have come to expect from the Winnipeg Jets. But we will break into everything that they've done so far, break it down, and we will also, take a look at, there's still some, if you watched our pre-free agency show, we had a list of names of players that we would like to see them take a run at. A couple names remain on my list on kind of the smaller group, which, the big group usually goes on day one. So let's get in and break this down. In order to do that, we're going to need the big guy here. Let's bring Kenny into the show, the man with the best music in the business. Here comes Kenny. Kenny, before we get rolling here, I'm loving what they're doing in the chat room. HJ Stays says hello from Altona. Rob Lindsay
hometown
says
let's
hello
go
from Kelowna. Absolutely loving that. I'm going to be in that area around Kelowna. Going to go visit my aunt and uncle in Vernon, BC in just a little while here. But I'm loving this. Hey, if you want to feel free chat room in the future to kind of just check in and tell us where you're listening from, we absolutely love that. That's great stuff. Thank you so much for that. And of course, we welcome your comments on what you thought of free agency, the action that has been happening or lack thereof. But Ken, we talked about it on Sportsnet yesterday. I always say, we talk about all the stuff that this is what the Jets could do. They could take this big swing here. They could take this big swing there. And it always usually ends up being a fairly quiet day. Should we have been surprised by that this time around?
Yeah, not, as we talked about, and not overly surprised they weren't in on the big hitters. I mean, it's just like what we talked about a couple of years ago when Alex Pietrangelo was going on the market. I mean, the Jets were looking for a right-handed shot defenseman, an elite level first pairing guy. But if you can't get a seat at the table, I mean, you don't get a seat at the table. I mean, the interesting part for yesterday, Sean, for me, is that some guys that we would have thought were sort of on the radar within the budgetary constraints for the Winnipeg Jets, guys like maybe a Ryan Strome, he signed for $5 million. I mean, but the Jets don't really have a vacancy at the second line center position unless they're moving one of their centers, right? So for me, the big one is Palat, right? I mean, so we talked about Andre Palat. He signed for $6 million. Is that too much for the Jets? They would have had to make some major roster surgery in order to make it happen if they were one of the teams Palat was interested in looking at. But the loss for me is in the middle tier Mason Marchment. Not only is the Jets not get Mason Marchment, he's going to be causing havoc in their own division for the Dallas Stars, right? So, but again, we don't know if Mason Marchment was considering the Jets. I mean, unless he tells us that he was, it's impossible to know for sure. What we know is that the Jets will still be sniffing around for some bargains. There's some guys that did not have qualifying offers given, like Matthew Perreault a couple years ago. I mean, a guy like Sonny Milano, I think, would be a guy that's of interest to a lot of teams out there. Maybe they're trying to be patient and seeing at a situation maybe they can get a little bit more money on the open market. We don't agree on Danton Heinen. I think Danton Heinen is a guy who could be a penalty killer. He could play on the checking line, third or fourth line kind of guy, give you a little bit of offense. But kind of be a really good, like the Jets are trying to get harder to play against. He can play a physical game. He's fast, and he can give you some secondary scoring. So to me, Heinen is a guy to maybe keep an eye on. Evan Rodriguez is a guy that I had on my original list. Again, we weren't expecting a big deal, but any of the big moves would have to be coming in the trade department. And in order to do that, they needed a preemptive strike. They needed to sort out what was happening with Blake Wheeler. And as of right now, that hasn't happened yet. We don't know if there's a team that's willing to take on A, the hit, and B, the 2-year term on a deal involving Blake Wheeler. I was just on with Andrew Patterson with Hustler on Winnipeg Sports Talk. For me, Sean, the creativity has to come into play here. I mean, a team like the Arizona Coyotes is well below the floor. They've got room, but they've shown an impetus in the past to be a broker in the deal of a guy like Blake Wheeler to retain some. If the Jets don't want to retain the salary, fine. Maybe Arizona will retain the salary, but then there's going to have to be a sweetener involved. What level is that sweetener right now in order to get Blake Wheeler to a contender? We'll have to see how it goes. But to me, not super surprised, but at the same time, we expected a little bit more action than a fifth-line center and a backup goalie. There's no doubt about that.
Before we do get rolling here, just want to make sure that we give a shout out to our sponsors. Let's start with the Jansen Group, who've been with us, just right from the they were our first sponsor. We're so proud to have them. Jansen Group, of course, is a Winnipeg-owned and operated company that provides employee benefits solutions to companies from one employee to 10,000 or more. Over 30,000 Canadian businesses trust Jansen Group with their employee benefit needs through various products, including the Chambers Plan, Maximum Benefit, and Sign Up. Jansen Group is a platinum member of Canada's Best Managed Companies and named one of the Manitoba's top employers. Whether you are a sole proprietor, part of a large organization, or an association with thousands of employees, Jansen Group has an employee benefit solution for you. Thank you so much to the guys and the gals and everyone over at the Jansen Group. I'll tell you something that caught me a little bit off guard yesterday was the degree to which the Jets' cap constraints are working against them now. You talked about the idea that it was going to have to be a preemptive strike for them to be busy on the market. You either have to move a Pierre-Luc Dubois or you have to move a Blake Wheeler, as we've been hearing about, or we'll get into the possibility of them not being moved because that suddenly seems like a stronger possibility from what we heard yesterday. But I was a little bit shocked by the talk that we heard about just how cash-strapped this team is up against the cap. Now I'm looking, give me an idea, Ken. So right now, after Riddick has been signed, they've got in the neighborhood of $15 million and change. 7 of that probably is going to go to Pierre-Luc Dubois. 7 and change, if my estimation is correct. So you're talking about having $8 million left over to sign in the neighborhood of how many? Like 5, 6 more players? Is that what we're at here?
Well, I would also say, too, that based on what Kevin Cheveldayoff said about Cole Perfetti yesterday, that Cole Perfetti, will come off LTI and then, his contract is just under $900,000. So to me, yes. I think it's closer to $14 million available, and that would be for, that's counting 17 out of the 23. So you still would have room for, that's still got to have 5 or 6 players. And including in those players are Mason Appleton and Jansen Harkins, who are restricted free agents with arbitration rights. Now, again, both those guys I could see coming in, in the $1.5 million range, maybe somewhere in there. I mean, let's account maybe $3 to $4 million for the pair of them. Now suddenly you're down to $10 million, right? I mean,
well, that's without signing Pierre-Luc Dubois.
Right. So that's what I mean. So now you're down to maybe not a whole heck of a lot. So
they don't have any room.
And this is the other part. Just a quick one. I mean, this is why they had to get out from the Brian Little LTIR situation. I mean, without Little, if Little had not been moved, they had to squeeze an extra $5 million and change out of the deal in order to be cap compliant before the season started. And the bigger change for the Jets this year is they don't have as many guys that they could send down to the Moose to start the year to maximize their LTIR and then call those guys up when the season starts. So, it is definitely some gymnastics are required, Sean. But I mean, if you want to be a winning team, you're going to have to make some moves in order to create that space that's available. It's difficult. There's no one is saying it's easy. I mean, the fact that Kevin Cheveldayoff used the term legacy contract for Blake Wheeler tells you that he knows that's something that he has to be looking into. I mean, I think it's pretty fair to say the Jets are not going to be buying out Blake Wheeler's contract. They're trying to make a hockey trade with a guy that had 60 points in 65 games last year. Now, is that problematic? I mean, that depends on what level of I wouldn't use the word panic, but what we find on free agency is that when teams miss out on their preferred targets, they sometimes have to shift gears and go to the next tier of players. So I still think that there is a good chance that Blake Wheeler is moved. If you got to the situation where both sides are looking at a potential move, you make the necessary moves to facilitate that happening. But it's not going to be a situation where the Jets are giving away Blake Wheeler. But in this market and economy, look no further than the Vegas Golden Knights trade with the Carolina Hurricanes. Max Pacioretty is a 50-goal scorer, Sean, in the NHL. He was one of the top scorers for the Vegas Golden Knights. He basically was moved for the cap space required to sign Riley Smith and Brett Howden, the Manitoban. And they had to throw in Dylan Coughlin in order to make that deal happen. Now here, T. Mackey. I mean, the Islanders, are they a team that makes sense? Maybe. The Devils, Islanders. I think the Devils are going to be in on Nazem Kadri personally, but there's definitely a couple of teams that are looking for offense that have strong leadership cores in place that I could see Blake Wheeler fitting in. I mean, and the Islanders would be one of them, but are they? They had a tough year with COVID and being on the road, but are they a better contender than the Jets are? I mean, we'll see. Time will tell. But I still think there's a few teams that are out there that will be making calls on Blake Wheeler. I mean, it's going to happen today or tomorrow? Probably not. But I still don't. I still think the scenario is more likely that Blake Wheeler has played his last game with the Winnipeg Jets. But until a move happens, the possibility is that he will return.
Well, we're going to dig into that later. I wanted to kind of hammer home or kind of tell it through my eyes or my lens yesterday. What made me realize just how tight the Jets are when it comes to this financial situation. It answered a lot of the questions that we had yesterday. I mean, Evgeny Svechnikov does not get a qualifying offer. They allow him to walk. Doesn't mean he won't be back, mind you. I mean, what it means is that he's going to go test the market and maybe, just maybe, he'll come back to the Jets because there won't be as much out there. But the Jets didn't qualify him because, I mean, he would have had arbitration rights, correct, Ken? And the Jets weren't comfortable with the potential of him going to arbitration, and the award that would have been given may have put them in trouble financially. It's the same thing that happened with Eric Comrie. Like, if you want to know why these situations, they didn't seem to make sense, and even the one, Ken, that we were puzzled over yesterday, the idea that they didn't allow Eric Comrie to play enough games that put him in a situation where he was going to become an unrestricted free agent. The Jets had the option to play him as, I think it was one more game. You had the stat yesterday. What was it? How much more did he need to play?
He needed 90 minutes, I think.
90 minutes. So he needed to play 90 more minutes, and then he would have been a restricted free agent, and the Jets would have had more control. But making him a restricted free agent would have put them in a situation where he would have, they would have had to negotiate if he took it to arbitration, and the arbitrator made a deal that the Jets then lose control of how much they can spend. And Ken, in the end, what we're talking about with Svechnikov and Comrie is arbitrated deals are going to cost the Jets hundreds of thousands, not millions, not a million. Right. But their cap situation is so tight that they can't trust holding on to these players and going to arbitration. Because if the arbitrator gives them a specific number, that they can't hit that number, they lose too much control, allowing someone else to dictate how much those players are going to be paid. So that is how tight things are in Winnipeg, which Ken brings me back around to this before we get started about David Riddick and the loss of Comrie. And But it just kind of hammers home to me. I know what you're saying, and I know I've said it on here. It was brought up before this. I'll believe they'll move Blake Wheeler when I see it. I said the same thing at the time about Mark Scheifele, and it looks like I'm most definitely right about that situation. But if they are moving on, like, these deals needed to be done already. They needed to be made. And easy for me to sit back and say a general manager needed to pull the trigger, needed to do this. And you and I we almost got into it off air right before we got on here. And we should probably do it in the middle of this show here. But I take a look at a situation, and I know you and I think different about this. So let's have it out here right now.
Well,
I know.
Cambrian first, okay. Then we'll get into it.
Okay, sure. Let's give a shout out to our sponsors at Cambrian. I love this because you've got the cup going on that you got to show off. But first off, we want to show off all the sponsorships and the donations that Cambrian makes across our community. We're so proud to be, involved with an organization that is so generous and does so much in the community. We'll also want to talk about one of their products there, the Unfee. One of the things we love about Cambrian is banking for free with Unfee. You can save up to $222 per year. Simply set up a recurring direct deposit every month to your Cambrian checking or savings account, and you qualify. No minimum balance required. And I got to tell you, I don't know about you, Ken. I know myself and my family take advantage of the Unfee account. So that's great stuff. Show off that cup there we go. Perfect.
Thank you, Indigo. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Proud members at the credit union.
You betcha. Okay, let's get into this because, and I'll say what you said to me before. We get into the situation where Pierre-Luc Dubois has asked for a trade. We don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes with Blake Wheeler, but we know that there's, an idea that he may be willing to be moved. Winnipeg's a tough town, right? Evander Kane wanted out. Jacob Trouba wanted out. Eventually, Patrick Laine wanted out. I think that's, if you're the organization, you can't point the finger at the player. You need to point the finger directly at yourselves for the Patrick Laine situation. But you said to me, what are you going to do? You're just going to move a guy every time he asks to go? And I mean, I'll liken this, or I'll compare this to the situation that's happening down in Minnesota. I can't see Minnesota as that much different of a situation. The weather is maybe not quite as harsh as it is here, but it's similar. You've got Bill Guerin down there who got into a situation with two veteran players who he felt were taking up too much cap space and weren't pulling on the rope. Not good culture for the team. And he moved on from those guys. He moves on from Zach Parise. He moves on from Suter. It cost him an arm and a leg. They put themselves in a bad financial spot. He thought it was the right thing to do to get them out and move them out for the sake of the room. He runs into this situation just recently with his backup goaltender, or maybe his split goaltender in Talbot. And I loved what he said afterwards. We talked to him and it became clear that it was a problem to keep him in this room. So we needed to move him. So they turned around and they moved him. Now, these are situations where I actually think that the Talbot situation is one where he came out swimmingly on that. But they are in financial hell because of buying out those two players, Parise and Suter. But he made the move because he thought it was the right move for the room. And it's hard to argue based on what we've seen from that team since that he was wrong about that. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes for the greater good of the room, you got to take a loss, or you got to at least go out and try and take players that don't want to be here and turn them into players that want to be here. And I'm not saying that Kevin Cheveldayoff hasn't tried to do that, but if we go back to Evander Kane, how many years was Evander Kane here? Was it 3? Was it 4 that he didn't want to be here, that we clearly hear afterwards that he caused problems in the room, that problem ended up having to be dealt with by the coaches and by the players? And how long, I mean, in the end, Kevin Cheveldayoff got a great return for Evander Kane. But at what cost? How many years was that room hampered by him being in the room before he got the return that he wanted on the open market? Now, maybe we can look back then and say that team wasn't a very good team anyway. They wouldn't have been winning, so it's okay, you do that. But these last couple of years and going forward, if there's issues that need to be corrected in the room and you're not doing it because you don't feel you're getting exactly what you want on the open market, I'm not privy to what's coming back, and maybe what's coming back is entirely unacceptable. And if you showed me Kevin Cheveldayoff's options, I may look at that sheet and say, he's right. He shouldn't move them. But if there is not every effort being made to take a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois and take him right now while you have 2 years of team control and move him out of town because he clearly doesn't want to be here and get something back in return. And if you think that the room is better off not having Blake Wheeler there anymore, if there needs to be changes, culture changes, and that's how you do it, I don't see a lot of excuses for those moves not being made. I'm not a wait and see guy. I'm not we're going to put a problem in the room and let people deal with the problem until I figure this out. I think it's unfair and it happens too often here. And there needs to start being a different view of how you handle these situations. You got to move on faster when guys don't want to be here, especially if they became a problem. And the room was a problem this year. I'm not saying it was specifically related to these, these dealings by Kevin Cheveldayoff, but it cannot help. It cannot help to have that situation brew.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, the situation with Cam Talbot is completely different. I mean, Bill Guerin has a replacement for Cam Talbot, Marc-Andre Fleury. He has his replacement. The Jets do not have a replacement for Pierre-Luc Dubois. So, to your point, I mean, sure. But to this point, I would argue on Dubois' case, Dubois was one of the most engaged players on the team last year. So even if he had 1 foot out the door, he didn't play or act like he had 1 foot out the door. So to me, it's all about how he handles this next situation. If he's really disgruntled and unhappy, and I said this with Hustler shortly a little while ago. I mean, Pat Brisson is a pretty calculated individual. He's not mentioning Montreal unless it's intentional. I mean, even too, Kent Hughes was asked directly today about Pierre-Luc Dubois, saying he can't comment on another team's player. Would they like a big, strong center? Of course they would. Well, guess what? They also just traded Kotkaniemi a year, or not traded, but allowed the deal to happen. I mean, unless if the Montreal Canadiens want Pierre-Luc Dubois, then Pat Brisson better tell Kent Hughes to raise the offer. I'm sorry. You're not giving away a guy that you traded a generational talent for. The Jets are not obligated to turn Patrick Laine into Kirby Dach because Montreal wants Pierre-Luc Dubois or because Dubois wants to play for his home province, Sean. So you're right. I don't agree with your take. I'm not dismissing it. There's parts of it that I agree with, but the Jets are not in any position to be saying that every time a player raises his hand and is unhappy with his ice time, and yes, I'm talking about Jack Roslovic, every time a player doesn't like how much he's playing, you can't just say, sorry, I'm going to move you to the next candidate. That's not how sports work. Not in amateur hockey, not in minor hockey, not in junior hockey, not in pro hockey. If you want more ice time, play better. It's a pretty simple formula for me. I know that we don't agree on this part, Sean, but to me, Pierre-Luc Dubois gave everything that he had last year. Was he frustrated by how things turned out? Absolutely. Is he going to flourish under Rick Bowness? Is he even going to have a chance to play under Rick Bowness? We don't know that. But if I'm the Jets, I am certainly going to give Pierre-Luc Dubois the opportunity to play under Rick Bowness and then figure out what you want to do. Again, I know what you're saying. You would prefer the Patrick Laine playbook than the Jacob Trouba. For me, if the Jets were rebuilding and comfortable trading Dubois, then they would have made about 5 moves by now. Then they would have started the teardown 2 months ago. You move Hellebuck, you move Scheifele, you move Dubois, and you clean it all out. Here's my problem with the idea of a rebuild, Sean. The rebuild had to happen 2 years ago. Otherwise, the rebuild's not going to accelerate and the timeline's not going to line up so that you can maximize Kyle Connor, Nikolai Ehlers, Josh Morrissey, and all those other players. Now you're counting on Cole Perfetti, Chaz Lucius, and the next round of players. So I know it's a complicated scenario, but I'm not moving Pierre-Luc Dubois unless I'm blown away by an offer. And if the Canadiens want to wait or they want to have a staring contest, you have the staring contest and see what happens. If Pierre-Luc Dubois has a bad attitude or does not perform up to expectations, then fine. Then you can make a trade. And I know people will point to Columbus and say that's evidence that it'll happen again. That's not the Pierre-Luc Dubois that I saw last year. Now it's all about how he handles it.
What's different between the Pierre-Luc Dubois situation right now and the Patrick Laine situation?
Well, we don't think that there's a scenario inside the room with Pierre-Luc Dubois. Whereas before, Patrick Laine wasn't comfortable, A, in his usage, B, in how he was being treated by some of the other players. We've heard nothing to suggest Pierre-Luc Dubois has any problems within the room. His ice time was on the rise, and he just finished having a productive season where I think he set a season high for goals with 28, and he almost has set a season high for points. Here's the other part, Sean. If Pierre-Luc Dubois wants to be a $9 million player, I've got the best solution for him. Saddle up to Kyle Connor for the next season, put up an 80-point season when Kyle scores 50, and then you say to Pat Brisson, get me out of here, get me to Montreal. Because you're not getting $9 million as a 60-point player. You're not. Are you? I mean, Patrick Laine is still.
I never said that. I never said that. Well, I think I've been the one on the record on this show saying that more often that Pierre-Luc Dubois needs to do more. Yeah, it's great that he's a defensive player and he's hard to play against, but you don't get paid big money unless you are producing like crazy. Right. We're talking about the difference. I think it was either you and I had this conversation, or Scott Billick and I, or something like that, along the lines of like, you can't get too crazy about what he did this year, because he rode shotgun with Kyle Connor, who was absolutely phenomenal, and ended up with 30 points, in the neighborhood of 30 points less than his winger as the centerman. I mean, I'm all for it with you. And I agree. That's how the player has to handle it. That's fine. But what I don't like about this is the attitude that when there's because this happens all the time. This is how we see it through this Winnipeg lens, but it's all around the league that players want to get moved, and GMs will often facilitate that. Sometimes they won't, but here they rarely do. Right? Like Jacob Trouba had to grind for years here before they moved him, and then they finally did, right? And so did Evander Kane. And to your point, that I mean, the whole thing about what's different about the Patrick Laine situation, the Pierre-Luc Dubois situation, if Laine thought there was problems in the room, that just didn't happen in the first couple games of that season, 2 seasons ago. That had been happening for a while. So again, it's just more evidence that they allowed something to fester for a really long time, or didn't nip what maybe should have happened is nip the situation in the bud, so that a young superstar felt comfortable in a town that he'd said on numerous occasions he wanted to make his long-time home in the NHL. But to me, the situations are exactly the same. They're exactly the same because, to your point, Patrick Laine was still producing. He walked out of town in his last game when it was absolutely phenomenal. The year before that, when everyone said all this guy can do is score, he went out and became a totally complete player, did everything the Jets asked him to do. And when Blake Wheeler was out and injured, as soon as he came back into the lineup, they pulled him off that line, and the same play kept rolling out over and over again. But Patrick Laine did exactly what you are suggesting Pierre-Luc Dubois should do, right?
Right, and then he got traded. That's my point. So then he got moved. So do it now.
But why? What does he need to prove? Like if Pierre-Luc Dubois is out there, what more does Pierre-Luc Dubois need to do to show people like his value? Like, this is where you and I disagree. The value's been established. Laine had established his value and could have been traded at any point. Pierre-Luc Dubois established his value and could have been traded at any point. The difference here is the game of chicken being played by the Jets management to try and get the exact assets that they want. My point is, in the meantime, it's the room that deals with that. It's the coach. It's the leadership group. It's everyone in that room dealing with the guy who's made it clear that he doesn't want to be there anymore, and the ramifications that come from that. And we are talking about a room that, Ken, we had heard around the league. We had heard that one of the coaches that came in to speak to the Jets about it were blown away by the chatter that was happening about their room. Like, this is league-wide known about the Jets and their issues in the room. So if we are talking about issues in the room, and we're talking about a strategy that takes guys who don't want to be in the room and lock them in that room for an extra amount of time to make sure you squeeze every asset you can get for that guy, I think that creates problems. I think it creates problems when you're putting people in the room who don't want to be there. If you want to look for the roots of a toxic atmosphere, why not start there? If we're trying to figure out what the problem is, and believe me, the Winnipeg Jets right now are desperately trying to figure out what the problem is in that room, and Rick Bowness is here to be one of the guys who can figure that out. That may be a good place to start, is locking in players here rather than moving on and getting the assets that you can get for them right now, not getting fleeced, but going out and saying to the other GMs, look, I'm moving this guy. I'm going to move him if you give me something fair. It doesn't need to be above market value. I don't need to fleece you, but I need something fair. So let's go there and let's move this guy, because this is not a good situation for him here, and it's not a good situation for our team. I don't think I've ever seen an example of that happening. I think I always see the example of holding on to that asset until you can move it right at the end for what you want. And I mean, in the case of Jacob Trouba, probably didn't move him for what they wanted. That's the other part of this, Ken. You hold on to him, and Pierre-Luc Dubois doesn't have a good year, doesn't put up the points he had this year, doesn't tear it up in the World Championships like he did this last year. I mean, is there a better time to move this player? There may not be, because team control shrinks every single game that he plays, and who knows how he's going to bounce back next year.
Well, I mean, if you're going to send me something other than, Kirby Dach, I think would be a good bet, but he can't be the only player you're getting. I mean, unless Kent Hughes is offering Nick Suzuki, which we know he's not, why are you turning Patrick Laine into Kirby Dach? You can't turn a guy into a gamble.
Is that the trade? Is that what's been thrown out there? I haven't heard that.
Dvorak or Dach, I mean, they're not moving Suzuki, so I mean, if you're the Jets, if you're the Jets, you have to get Josh Anderson and then something else. I mean, to me, this is very simple. If they meet the asking price, great. And this is what I would also say: if Pierre-Luc Dubois didn't enjoy playing for a losing team, good for him. Who likes losing? Nobody. But if Rick Bowness can come in here and Pierre-Luc Dubois is suddenly playing first line minutes, I'm pretty sure Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to be okay with his life, whether it's in Winnipeg or elsewhere. I mean, I would not be giving away Pierre-Luc Dubois. I'm sorry. I mean, I understand.
There was never a suggestion that they should do that. I think, Ken, and I've talked to general managers before. There's a lot of general managers out there that believe in a strategy. We've talked about this before. Talked about this with Rutherford, and he said when he trades, he goes out. He never tries to win a trade. He tries to find trades where he moves a player, and he says his strategy when he calls a GM is says, "I need this in my lineup right now. What do you need? What can we do to make this work? Because I need this right now." Instead of I'm not sure I agree with the idea that every GM is just out there to totally nail the other guy, right? That they're like, "Oh, you got to get rid of this guy. Let's unload all this garbage on you." I think some GMs do that, but I think there's a lot of GMs that operate out of the feeling that if I keep open lines of communication with the other GMs out there, when I need to move a guy, I'll be able to move him. Here's one thing we know for certain. The Jets, when they've needed to be able to move guys, have not been able to move them. It's taken time. It's taken a lot of time. There's other GMs that will go out, and when they need to make a move, it'll happen, and it'll happen like that. I'm not saying everybody. We can all think of like Jake DeBrusk in Boston and Sweeney in that situation. How long has that been dragging out for? And they held on to that guy, and now he wants to be there, right? And that's different. Different, and I'll get to the reason why we shouldn't think about Pierre-Luc Dubois in those terms. But this is the one thing that we can definitively say. I don't know what's coming back the other end, and maybe the other GMs aren't being fair, and maybe they're not playing nice in the sandbox. And if they're not, I'll be the first one to say this, Ken. If we knew out there that the offers being submitted to Kevin Cheveldayoff were just joke offers, I'm not saying unload them at a loss. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that I'm not sure that I believe that everything to move these to be done to move these players, including maybe taking a slight loss, is I'm not sure that's happening. I'm okay with taking a slight loss in assets if it means not destroying your room, right? That I'm okay with that. And here, I'm just going to make this point because I've wanted to make this on the show for a long time. When it comes to Pierre-Luc Dubois and everyone who says that this is a negotiating tactic, point to me when an agent has ever gone and poisoned the groundwater with a city and its fans by saying, "I'm going to leave you as quickly as I possibly can," and use that as a negotiating tactic. This is not a negotiating tactic. This is a player very honestly saying, "I do not want my future in that town. I'm going to leave as soon as I can." You do not, as a bargaining chip, say, "I want to leave this town. I don't want to stay true to this fan base. I don't want to wear this jersey anymore," and then turn around and be like, "I was kidding. It was just a negotiating tactic." People don't do that. You won't see other people doing that. What you're seeing here, everyone who's holding out and saying that this is just Pierre-Luc Dubois and his agent playing hardball, that's not how hardball is played. Unless you want a toxic situation to start your long-term career in a new city. Sorry, Ken.
No, it's okay. You don't need to be sorry. It's all good. What I'm saying is that it doesn't mean the Jets should just roll over. And I know that's not what you're saying, but here's the problem. What happened is, this is what we know what happened. Two teams traded an issue for one another. Neither one of those issues has been resolved with the long-term contract.
Yeah.
Has Jarmo Kekalainen given Patrick Laine away? No, and he's not going to. So Kevin Cheveldayoff is in the same position as Jarmo, except Jarmo has now gone for the preemptive strike and gone out and gotten Johnny Gaudreau just in case he can't keep Patrick Laine. So until the Jets can move Blake Wheeler, they are not able to just say, you know what, PLD, see you later. I mean, I just don't. And this is the problem, Sean. I just have one issue with your premise. I think the premise is solid for the most part. But here's the problem. If you take one deal at a loss, 30 other general managers think you're always going to take the loss in the next. Absolutely they will. How do you figure they won't?
You think that as soon as a guy makes a trade,
of course,
everyone thinks
he's vulnerable. The vultures are coming.
Yeah,
the vultures are coming.
I don't see it that way. There's a lot of GMs in this league who've been around for a really long time, and you'll notice that certain teams trade again and again and again, right? Like, who was it? The Canadians, they trade all the time with. I saw this stat over when we were there, and some other team just tied. There's two teams that are tied for the most times they've gone there. But relationships exist because there's trust that gets built up in that fraternity. So I agree with you. Are there GMs out there? Hey, we know that this happened towards the end with Montreal and Bob Gainey. We know that GMs got predatory towards him, or that's the stories that I've been told from people who were in that fraternity, that it became a situation by which people were acting predatory because they thought they'd be able to get assets at an unfair advantage. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. What I'm saying, and maybe this is what I'm saying more than anything, is that idea of how Rutherford approaches things. The idea that he says, I'm never trying to fleece a guy. I always want to make sure that if I trade with another GM, that he feels he's getting as much value as I do, to the point that if he feels that he didn't and it didn't turn out that way, it's almost like, I owe you. I got you. Let's correct this so that we can keep these open lines of communication going. Maybe, just maybe, that's the tact Winnipeg has to take. As a destination that is going to constantly and always be dealing with the idea of players that don't want to be here, maybe it's best to try and create a scenario by which you are not standing with your back against the wall and saying, nope, I'm not taking a deal until you give me exactly what I need, and trying to find those trading partners that are going to be willing to say, listen, let's work this out. Let's make something happen with both of us, because I got a feeling I'm going to be going to you quite often because guys want out of Winnipeg. So next time you need a guy out of Winnipeg, I'm going to be here, and I'm going to try and make sure that I give you straight up value back, because that opens up all kinds of opportunities for me. Maybe that's what I'm saying more than anything, is the tact. Like, I just put it this way. We saw Evander Kane sit in that room for 3 to 4 years. We saw Jacob Trouba sit in that room for 3 to 4 years. We saw Patrick Laine. They moved him on a little bit faster. And what we've seen year after year after year is a dressing room where people were questioning what was wrong in that room in 2019, Ken. And at the time, people were like, oh, yeah, it's crazy. People are just making up stories, all this kind of stuff. Except we've seen that room is just eroded more and more and more. To last year, it all exploded. So something's going on there. Having players in the room who don't want to be there can't be a help to this situation. I just think that a tact that allows you to move rather than wait and sit guys who don't want to be here in that dressing room for years at a time, I think we've seen enough evidence that doesn't work, and maybe a different tact needs to be taken.
Fair, but if you're in a position, like Jim Rutherford was with the Pittsburgh Penguins, so it's a lot easier to recruit to Pittsburgh based on the winning atmosphere that's there.
He did it.
So
he did
it's
it in Carolina. He did it and won a cup in Carolina.
Sure, but it's another appealing place to be going. Winnipeg is not at the top of most lists, so every time a player opens his mouth and isn't happy and isn't thrilled, you can't be it's hard enough to get good players. You can't just be giving away good players.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that every time a player says it. I think every measure should be taken to ensure that you can try and get on the other side of that, to try and do what they did with Jake DeBrusk to make sure that he's happy. Sometimes players aren't happy with the coach. Sometimes there's certain situations. I'm not advocating a hair trigger approach in which every time a guy wants out of town, it's like, boom, he's gone. I don't care what we get back. I'm not advocating that, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the opposite of that. We are talking about rudimentary caveman weapons that are being used to move players because they're in the dressing room for a long time. And we know from the Evander Kane situation that it caused problems. We know that it caused friction. We know that it did for years at a time until it finally just exploded. There was no choice but to move the player. I just think that we've tried that tact. We've tried the tact of sit on that asset for as long as you possibly can. Again, I'm not advocating giving those players away. What I am advocating is maybe trading 100% and getting 95% or 90% back. Maybe that 10% loss that you have is worth the burden that you remove from the dressing room and from behind the scenes.
And sorry, in Bones We Trust, I didn't say that nobody wanted to be here. I just said it is not at the top of most people's lists, which is 100% accurate. The people that are here, lots of them have committed. If you listen to our show, lots of players have committed to here. Lots of Jets players have enjoyed their time and then had a good time here and signed up for a long term. But, in terms of attracting free agents, it can be a challenge. And we know the facts are a lot of teams have Winnipeg on their no trade list. So that also impacts parts of the deals that are made or can be made.
I wish I would have seen this. You were telling me about you and Hustler before on Winnipeg Sports.
Oh, it's okay.
Thanks not being the same as Hus. I didn't see it, but yeah. Okay, let's
all good.
Move on.
Let's change. Hang on, one quick one here. It's a minor signing, but the Jets have signed forward Alex Limoges. He played for San Diego Gulls last year. Probably a depth signing, it looks like, as a forward here.
Should be
1 year entry-level deal. He played at Penn State University. So there you go.
Okay, let's go and turn our attention to after we fell down that rabbit hole, and we can keep going down the rabbit hole after we talk with Kevin here. But we want to address the Jets' biggest signing so far. That would be David Riddick as the backup goaltender. So we're going to bring in Kevin Woodley from In Goal Magazine, the goalie guru of record and of note. Kevin, really appreciate you joining us here. First, to start off, give us your take on the Jets' addition of David Riddick.
Guy who's got a lot of upside still, I believe. I know early in his career when he came over and got started with the Flames, after that first season in the American Hockey League, there were a number of guys that I talked to around the league that really liked him, saw a lot of potential there. Coming off a tough year, frankly. It wasn't a great one in Nashville. Obviously, playing behind a Vezina finalist in UC Saros is tough when you don't get to play that much. And also because the standard's so high, you feel like you have to sort of match that. Like they're a team that leaned on goaltending heavily to have a chance to win. And that's always, that's a ton of pressure. New team. The other guy's one of the best in the league. It's a lot. And you don't get to play as much. And so, there's an opportunity here to maybe rebuild some foundational.
Oh, we lost him. We'll get him back here.
Probably got a call coming in. Yeah.
I'm interested in this. I can't wait to talk with him about this because just already there's a bunch of questions that I have happening in my head. But I want him to further explain the upside, right? Because it's funny. This is a goaltender that if he was a stock, his stock looked to have been rising and has been crashing for a long time. Right? A lot of times you don't look at that kind of direction and see upside. Right? Like upside is maybe the last word I was expecting to hear him say. But I mean, I don't know. Let's just start off first because we didn't talk about it. Go for it.
Just a quick thing on Riddick. I mean, for folks who didn't see, I mean, on the Zoom call today, he's quite a humorous individual. And I was talking with my buddy Wes Gilbertson from Post Media. He's got a really big personality. I wasn't really sure what to expect from David Riddick, but he was very funny. I mean, openly saying, what do you expect? I played once a month, and like things like, I didn't really miss the Canadian media. Oh, just jokes. Like it was one of those things where there was some truth in the matter, even though he was kind of making things sound like it was a bit of a, he's a funny guy is what I would say. And here's the other part, Sean. He's a motivated guy. This guy, if you want to stay in the league, you can't be rolling at 886 next year. If you want to stay in the league, you got to be over 900, and you have to turn yourself into what Laurent Brossoit did and what Eric Comrie did. Those were two guys who were unproven. I mean, David Riddick at least has been a starter in the NHL before, right? I mean, that's the thing that people forget. 2020, the guy's an NHL All-Star. So has he played at that level since? No. He lost the job to Cam Talbot when the Jets played them in the qualifying round. I mean, Riddick will be playing, not once a month, but he won't be playing a ton. But David Riddick will be looking at 20 to 22 starts. That is what the Jets will be looking for. And he has to do an adequate to above average job. Nobody's asking like him. Nobody's asking him to be an all-star. But here's the other part that I'm happy to say. I'd like the people to check the receipts on last fall when Eric Comrie was given the job. How many of those people thought Eric Comrie was going 10-5-1 with the .920 save percentage? None. That's how many. Yeah. And how many people thought Laurent Brossoit was a great signing? None, because nobody knew who he was outside of the fact he was drafted in Alberta and played with the Oilers. I mean, let's get serious here.
I think it's funny, though, he made the comment about what do you expect from me? I only played once a month. I don't know that that's going to change that much when he comes to Winnipeg. I mean, it sounds like you believe he'll be playing more games. Boy, oh boy, that was a massive topic of conversation that we had during Kenny and Renny last year about the usage of Eric Comrie. And I mean, I know I was blown away at the idea that they weren't playing him nearly as much as I thought they should, or as much as, to be quite honest, I thought he earned. It does make a little bit of a question mark, I think, if you're the Buffalo Sabres, about like, okay, you saw Eric Comrie finally come to the NHL level and show what so many scouts thought that he was going to be capable of at the NHL level, but he did it for just a handful of games, right? Like, what's that going to look like in a night after night basis? That's a massive question mark for the Buffalo Sabres, who, boy, that's a team that I think that they finally turned the corner on their culture. And a guy like Eric Comrie is really, really going to help with that. But that goaltending situation, I don't want to, because Comrie is such a question mark, I think there's a ton of question marks in net there. And like, this could be a team, I think, that could start pushing upwards and doing better than what we've come to expect from that team. But boy, oh boy, that could be one of those situations that they bump into. The other part you're talking about, Riddick, go on.
Quick one on Comrie. I mean, this guy earned everything that he's getting, right? I mean, here's the thing.
Oh, yeah.
He went on the roster carousel. He was claimed on waivers, traded back on waivers, everything else. I mean, had to go to Arizona, had to go to New Jersey. I mean, just when the guy thought he was getting rolling, COVID hits. I mean, he had a great start for New Jersey, then he couldn't play again. I mean, the fact that there were multiple teams, Sean, I know this for a fact, multiple teams viewed Eric Comrie as a job share situation, not just a backup that was going to play 20 games. You know what? Yeah. If someone tells you they can play you more, who's going to say no to that? Not you, not I. And they're going to give you a raise. I mean, never mind, they're just going to give you a better opportunity. They're going to give you more money. I mean, is there some risk for Buffalo? Sure. But, I mean, Eric Comrie handled the risk fine last year. And you know what? Good on him for getting an opportunity. And, now it's up to him to, last year he showed he can do it. Now let's see if he can flourish in that scenario.
We're going to add Kevin Woodley back, and we finally reconnected with him. Kevin, I wanted to ask you a question based on what you were saying at the beginning. I was explaining it to the audience. David Riddick is this guy whose stock was, going up, and then seems to have crashed. So when you use the term, there's a lot of upside with this goaltender, it seems counter to what we're seeing from him. If you think of the player like a stock, when you say upside, why do you think he has upside?
Yeah, I mean, there's elements of sort of early on. There were elements like I actually had goalie coaches sort of make comparisons in terms of stance and structure, and the ability to sort of hold edges and the way he sort of waited on pucks and the patience he had. Actually had guys make comparisons to Carey Price his first couple of years in the pros, and obviously that's a pretty lofty comparison. But there's some tools there, and there's an athleticism there. There are things that as a goalie coach, I think other guys around the league look at and say, I can work with this. It hasn't panned out at the National Hockey League level to that sort of high-end degree at any point, but there have been moments when they call him Big Save Dave in Calgary, like the numbers match that. When you looked at his high danger save percentage, when I looked through Clearsight Analytics, like the success that he had on the toughest chances, sort of showed you that there was something there. The problems that we saw were sort of, the goals that kind of hurt you, that you don't expect to go in, the low danger stuff. Seemed at times to get worse when score was tied, when score was tight. First 5 minutes, last 5 minutes of a period where his numbers sort of dipped when you look at things like score effects and other elements like that. So it's hard to sort of put your finger on why that is at different times. You wonder if it's between the ears as much as it is between the pipes technically. But again, like to me, technique breeds consistency. And so as a goalie coach, I'm sure there's a lot of guys that still look at it and they're like, if I can add a few more technical layers, like the upside is there, the intangibles are there. If I can add a little bit of a better base, that's where you get that love. That's where consistency comes from to me. Like technique provides consistency. And, so I don't think it's a coincidence that he was at his best when he played more. Like last year being a tough year for him isn't a shock to me because he barely played. And so even with a really good goalie coach in Ben Vanderklok in Nashville to help him, work on elements of his game when he's not playing, it's still a really tough adjustment for him. So I guess the upside if you're Winnipeg is the downside is he's probably looking at the same scenario. He's not going to play a lot. Yeah. The good news is you've got a goalie coach who has already shown with Eric Comrie a real ability to sort of help manage those moments and help a guy take steps in his game when he's not playing a ton. So that's one positive. The other positive is, heaven forbid, because durability has been a massive part of his success today. But if you were to lose Connor for a couple of weeks or a month to something small where you need a guy that can step up, like I think you get better out of Dave Rittich when you need him for 2 straight weeks than you're going to get when you only need him every couple of weeks. Obviously, that's problematic, if Connor stays healthy and plays as much as he has in the last little while. But that's also a problem that maybe they can find a solution to better than people have in the past. Like, again, when you look at the skill, when you look at some of the elements I talked about in terms of stance and patience on edges and the way he holds those, there's a lot to like there. He's a very outgoing personality, very active personality. And so that's something that you're going to have to sort of find a place for on the ice and within the room there. But he doesn't cheat it on work ethic. Like if you need him out there 20 minutes after practice as a target, he's out there. He'll be vocal. He'll be giving it to the guys a little bit if they ring one off his mask or, if they can't hit the net or they're not doing the drill right, he's going to tell them. But he's going to put the work in. And I like I said, I just think when you know that work ethic and you see the tools and think maybe there are some things we can do differently than the last team, that's where I see the upside for David. Right? Again, like I said, as an insurance policy, there are two different things. There are a lot of goalies that can give you every 2 weeks, but not 2 weeks straight or a month straight. And there are guys that struggle with the other way. And it usually takes time. Yaroslav Halak used to be like that. He was a guy that, or sort of Anton Hudobin is who I'm thinking of. Sorry. Like for the longest time, if you had him for 2 straight weeks, he was at his best, but he couldn't figure out the backup role. Eventually he did, and he did both. And that's where he had the most success in his career. Like David's inching towards that. He still has to solve, though, can I be at my best when I don't play as often? But that sometimes is a process. And hopefully he took a step in that regard last year and he's better ready for it this season. But like I said, if you do need him for a long stretch, I think he's a guy that's capable of that.
Kevin, kind of a two-parter. That personality was definitely on display on the Zoom call this morning, but the other part of that equation is his emotional side. He's a guy that can be very emotional. And do you think that's been a factor in some of maybe the decline in his play outside of just the volume of games? And secondly, how would you describe the motivation for someone like David, where he pretty much knows that if you're rocking 880 or worse next year, you're probably out of the league?
Yeah, I mean, it can go two ways. Or you can look at it as motivation or you can manifest it as pressure. And you hope it becomes motivation and doesn't become too much of a pressure point for him. And, that is the one. That's the thing. Eh? Like I can look at how they play between the pipes. I can analyze technique, but I can't see between their ears. And I got to be honest, from around the league, that's the one question mark that sort of remains, and it's on him to sort of prove it. When we look at technical things, guys that play with a lot of rhythm and a lot of movement, in their game tend to be the ones that struggle when they don't play as often, tend to have more peaks and valleys in their game. Again, that back to technique provides that consistent foundation and that base layer. But there are other elements between the years mentally that can also lead to some of those signposts along the way, that inability to sort of maintain consistency, struggling when you're not playing, a reliance on timing, a reliance on confidence and feeling good. Certainly there have been some, again, between the years, you don't get to see what's going on, but you look for signposts along the way. And there are a couple of red flags there. I think for sure, as cute a story as it was, the fact that, I don't know how much you guys have talked about this, but the fact he likes the goalie coach to hit him in the head twice with a puck on game days when he plays, becomes a fun, quirky goalie story. But there are other people that would look at that and say, okay, is this it's superstitious? Yes, but like, are you really not going to be at your best if I can't, pump a couple off your mask in warm up? Because that's not a real good sign of, that like mental strength. Like if you need that, if it's a fun thing, great. But if literally the goalie coach misses and struggles with it and you go to your afternoon nap thinking I'm screwed because I didn't get hit in the head twice, that's a little worrisome, right? And so there are some of those signposts that make you wonder how much of this is mental. But again, you got a really good mentor there in Wade Flaherty, right? Like a guy who is more than just a technical goalie coach, a guy who has been there, who has done that, both on the coaching side, because Eric had to go through a lot of this, right? In terms of learning to manage not playing and, manage the emotions that come with that. I think Eric took a big step working with the mental skills coach in the past year. I haven't had the chance to ask David if that's something he's done, but it's certainly something that I think there's enough signs that you might suggest if you were the organization. And short of that, like I said, you got a guy like Flats who, in my opinion, does such a good job helping these guys. It's not easy to be Connor Hellebuck's backup, and he's done a really nice job with the guys that have been in that role, especially Eric, for all the, in and out and around the league. LB, when he was there, had some really good seasons, went on to bigger and better things and better contracts. Now, if I'm Dave Rittich, I'm looking to pick that brain as much as I can on how to manage this situation.
Kevin, I got to say, just a couple questions, and this is bang up insight and analysis. Our audience has been used to that on this show, so thank you for bringing that here. I wanted to, you touched a little bit on it there. Eric Carmi comes here, has a great season last year. Lauren Brossois, Ken touched on it earlier on the show. Ken came in as an unknown and really did a phenomenal job here. You're talking about Flats and the job that he's done with those goalies. Being Connor Hellebuck's backup, I know you said that can be tricky, especially the volume. You don't get a lot of volume, but he seems to always be open to having a pretty good relationship with those other goaltenders and bringing them along. I wonder what you could tell us about kind of the trifecta that is created in Winnipeg with Hellebuck, Flats, and whoever that backup goaltender ends up being.
Well, I mean, yeah, I just love the way they build those relationships. And I think David, he's not going to be shy about getting right in those conversations, right? And it usually is their conversations. And I've watched it. I know nobody wants to go back to the bubble, but selfishly, as a guy who was at every time a team came through town, was at every practice, every game day skate, on the 400 level, sort of watching everything go on. I loved, it gave me an opportunity to see how some teams worked on practice day scenarios where you don't normally get that on the road, right? Like I know how the Canucks operate because I watch them on a daily basis, but teams like Winnipeg that would come through and be here for 5 days and have extra goalie time before morning skate, Eric would be out with the taxi squad after, day off where they'd come and skate, and getting to see the interaction between all the goalies and Wade Flaherty. I'm telling you, like, it's not, you guys see it all the time. So it's, you probably assume it's like that everywhere. It's not. Like the interaction between the three of them and the way they work and having relationships and knowing Connor and Eric, especially, and LB, and Flats, and getting to see Flats in the summers at some of the camps that we both attend. Like that's special. And I think it plays a role, in some of the success. Like they're working together. It's not a competition. They're all working together to get better, and they feed off each other, not just motivationally, inspirationally, but technically, tactically. They talk through scenarios. One of my favorite moments from that year was watching Helly and LB work through a specific scenario heading into the games against the Canucks. And now I'm scratching my head on what it was. But then having that exact play come to fruition as something the Canucks were running on their power play, leading to an open look for Besser that had created a lot of offense for them that year. And just having it was LB in that game, and he had a lot of good games here, but just he was sitting on it. He was there, he was set. And then talking to him later on, going over some video with him for some of the stuff we do with pro reads and in goal, and asking him about that. And he's like, yeah, I think we even ran the drill under our pro drills where we shared video of that drill. We shared some feedback from the goalies involved in it. And then you could see the save come from it. And it's like all that work, all those communications, and in that case, specific to a way a team attacked and leading to not just a big save and a tough save, but a momentum changing save in a game that, if I remember at the time, was either tied or remain. It might have even been a 1-0 game or a low scoring game where that was a game changer. And all those conversations among the three of them and the work they did in practice led directly to it. And so you guys know, like, I remember in the early days when goaltending was struggling there and when Helly hadn't sort of hit his stride, being invited on and talk on local radio, and people would ask me about Wade Flaherty and like, is he the goalie coach here? I'm like, yes, he is. Because I'm privileged to get to see some of those moments, and seeing it 2 years ago during that bubble year really reinforced that. And so I think that can be good for David. To be a part of that, to feel a part of that. And like I said, he's not going to be shy to jump right in there, both in terms of being vocal, but also listening, I would hope, and weighing in, right? Because he's another new set of eyes, a guy who has a guy just spent the last year with UC Saros, one of the best goalies in the league. So chances are he'll bring insights that you know that they will be open to hearing, whether they lead directly to changes or something they do differently or not, doesn't matter. It's that sort of ongoing conversation about goaltending that, I mean, clearly, as you could hear, I geek out on this stuff and talk about it. So like, I wish I could be a fly on the wall, but the way that is so open in Winnipeg to me is just a huge net positive. And, one more reason and one more chance that a guy like David Riddick could, maybe sort of get his feet back under him a little bit this year with the Jets and start to reestablish, some of those elements that had a lot of teams interested in him early in his career. So maybe even after this year, that interest is rekindled.
Kevin, let's stay on the coaching theme for a minute. With the Jets having Rick Bowness take over, we know that Connor Hellebuck saw far too many grade A and high danger chances last year. What are the biggest benefits for Connor Hellebuck with Rick Bowness taking in and the structure that he's going to try to implement with this Jets team moving forward?
A predictable environment. I mean, at the end of the day, there are easy and there are hard. Like, you see more high danger chances, or fewer high danger chances. You would hope those would decrease. The one thing that the numbers sort of did bear out under Paul Maurice is that as much as there were some times where it looked like they were giving up a lot and some good looks and some open looks, they were very good at maintaining lanes and keeping those in straight lines. And that plays to Connor Hellebuck's strengths. East-West, I wouldn't call East-West a weakness, but just relative. Like, if you're attacking Connor Hellebuck in straight lines, good luck, right? Yeah. Like, good luck. His patience, the way he holds edges, the way he doesn't commit early, like the closer you get and the more dangerous that chance looks based on proximity, Connor Hellebuck knows that the closer you get, the less net there is behind him. Like, he understands that relationship between puck and net and him. And he has patience to hold that position and not retreat and give away that advantage as the puck gets closer. And so I do think under Paul Maurice, what they did a really good job with, and I do know there was a coaching change this year. Don't worry, guys. But up until that point, they did a really good job of limiting laterals. And so I'm hoping that'll be part of the conversation and part of the defensive focus with Rick Bowness coming in and working with the rest of the staff to make sure, and this doesn't always happen with a lot of teams, it's usually, here's how we're going to play, the goalies figure it out. To me, the good teams look at, this is how our goalie is at his best. Let's play in a way that fits his strengths. Doesn't always happen, but you hope that conversation happens there. Generally speaking, Bones teams play really well defensively, and you're going to need a buy-in from the forwards to be a part of it. Defense is not about the defenseman. It's about how you play as a five-man unit. His teams have provided in Dallas. They didn't during the regular season last year, but you saw that it was in their DNA and they were able to get back to it in the playoffs. And as incredible as Jake Ottinger was, it was also a very friendly environment. Like, in it, yes, they were getting outplayed by a wild margin, but the number of super high dangerous chances that were within that were somewhat limited relative to the narrative. Like, he was still incredible. Don't get me wrong. But even it's not even a matter of like how many high dangers you give up. If you know where they're coming from, again, as a goalie, predictable environments. If I know, that's a high danger look, but I know that's the only place it's coming from, I don't have to worry about the next pass and the pass after that. I can lock in on that and trust that everyone else around me is on the same page, making the same reads and taking away the same next pass opportunities that I've read. Man, your life gets a whole lot easier. And traditionally, again, personnel could dictate a different approach, but traditionally, at least especially in Dallas, Rick Bowness teams created goalie-friendly, predictable environments. And man, Connor reads the game so well. Like I talked about, straight lines, one of the best in the league, if not the. If you can find a blend there for all the focus on maybe personnel and a lack of upgrades elsewhere on the roster, coaching can make a big difference in that regard because you've got one of the best goaltenders in the game. Play to his strengths, and I like the chances.
Okay, I love that answer because I had a conversation with Connor Hellebuyck a number of years ago about these, this dearth of high danger chances. And he had told me, go back and look at the video. There's very little backdoor tap-ins on me. The puck is, he said, I may face a lot of shots, but I like shots in tight. And I know where those shots are coming from. So while this is happening, I know where they're coming from. You just did a perfect job of explaining kind of what he said to me. And he thought that his defense didn't given enough credit in at least creating, a lot of opportunities against them, but they were predictable in his mind. It may be a moot point, and this will be my last question. It may be a moot point because Bones, like you said, could change these things up. But if Connor Hellebuyck is good at handling those kind of, defensive situations, does David Riddick fit into that mold as well? You said that he does really well with high danger chances or high danger shots, but does he handle them the same way or in a similar fashion as Connor Hellebuyck would?
That's a really good question. I talked about patience on the edges. You're right. And so in theory, that should be a strength. I think you build everything towards Connor and David. It's on David to adjust a little bit here, but we have seen teams, I know I've talked to teams and coaches in years past where you'll actually see changes to approach on a penalty kill, for example, in terms of what they're giving up on a PK against a certain team based on which goalie is starting. Perfectly honest, because my phone overheated and I'm doing this from the car, I had to redo this on my laptop because literally we're actually having an uncharacteristic for this summer warm day. So I put my phone up on the window and it overheated within a minute, and that's why you guys lost me.
Okay.
I've lost the ability. I had all of David's advanced numbers up through ClearSight Analytics and a really good deep dive on where his strengths and weaknesses are. I've lost the ability to watch you guys and toggle over to that while I'm on the computer. So and the one thing that Ken knows, I like, as much as I like to talk, as you can tell, I don't like to talk out of my ass. So I'm not gonna, theoretically, based on the way he plays, yes, I would think so. He can be a little more aggressive in those lanes, a little more overactive. Like the way Connor sits on things, man, that's a next level of patience that he demonstrates. So to expect the same might be a stretch. But strengths and weaknesses, I could see there. As much as David is a more active goalie and has some explosive laterally, I do remember, some of the plays that hurt him the most last year were slot line plays. Again, east-west through the middle of the ice in the offensive zone. So again, if you're limiting those, I think every goalie likes you to limit those. Some are better than others. And if that's relative weakness or an area where he was exploited last year, and it's something that they're not going to give as much up this year, then I think that's a good thing, not just for most goalies, but also specific to at least looking at his statistic profile last year, where he had his success and where he struggled a little bit.
Kevin, one of the few weaknesses in Connor's game is his puck handling, and we know it's something he works on, but what's going to take for him to get a little bit more comfortable and to maybe reduce the amount of adventures behind the goal line?
Well, he was on the ice last summer. Actually, no, he wasn't because I was going to say coming to camp in Kelowna with Mike Smith wouldn't hurt, but Smitty was at camp last year and Connor wasn't because he couldn't cross the border. And now this year, Connor, I think, is coming to Kelowna for Net 360 camp, and Smitty isn't because he's done. So maybe we can bring Smitty out to be a consultant and just work on the puck handling. Listen, like there's two elements of puck handling. One is the ability to make passes and just comfort with the puck on your stick, moving it around, the way you move it in and around your feet, the way you can hold off a forecheck, the way you can look off a forecheck, the way you can sort of turn your back on a forecheck to sort of guide guys. There are some technical elements where you position yourself behind the net, pulling the puck to one side or the other to force a forechecker to make a decision. And there's team components. Where do guys go? Do they always go to the spot? So there's a lot of different ways, elements that go into it. But at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable with it on your stick. You have to be comfortable passing it both ways, forehand, backhand. And then you have to be comfortable making the reads. And one of the toughest things to do, especially if you're not good at it out of the gate, is to keep doing it. I mean, it's a lesson that Mike Smith learned early from Marty Turco. He's told us this story. I'm sure he's told other people this story. Like his first game, he goes out there, makes a gap, has to leap back into the net and make an amazing save, doesn't handle the puck the rest of the period. And Turco's like, what are you doing out there? It's like, I almost cost us a goal. I don't care. Get back out there and handle the puck. It's the only way you get better. You have to live with some of the mistakes that will come with handling it more if you want to create a better puck handling goalie. And sometimes that's really tough to live with at the National Hockey League level. So this is a lesson right now for all minor hockey coaches that might be listening right now. You all say that you want a goalie that can handle the puck, but very few of you are willing to give him the opportunity to get out there and do it because you don't want to live with the mistakes. If you let him get out there at a younger age and handle it a lot, it will pay off dividends for you because he'll become more comfortable and more confident. And again, that's a tougher thing to do at the National Hockey League level than it is at that minor hockey league level. But it's all about that comfort and getting out there and handling it and just, feeling good about it, frankly. And with your reads, where the forecheck's going, where my guys are going, how much time do I have? Do I feel comfortable looking this guy off? Do I know how to use my body to, shield the puck and force him to go another way? Like there's a lot of elements that become instinctual over time, but without the work in game environments, it's really tough to trust them.
Kevin, goalies are supposed to be weird, and it is downright weird how good you are at this analysis game. It's just absolutely phenomenal. You've opened up a ton of things, and there's so many questions I've had over the years that you answered in this just tight conversation. Really appreciate you stepping in. Can't wait to have you on the show again. Thank you very much, my man.
Yeah, my pleasure. I apologize for the sunglasses. It is sunny and bright here. I would have been squinting the whole time, and I also apologize for the tooth. I'd love to tell you that you should see the other guy, but the truth is it's just old age. The old flipper didn't quite fit, so I'm waiting on the new one. And in the meantime, I don't look like a goalie, right? I look like a hockey player, I guess.
I was going to say, how do you lose that behind a mask? That's
I wish I had a great story, but there isn't one, and I apologize that I have to look like this for your guys' show. Also apologize about dropping out early. Nothing was smooth about getting onto this call, and like I said, coming from Canucks development camp, just was a little late getting out of there today. So I appreciate your guys' patience with me being able to, or taking my time getting on the call.
Thanks.
Nothing getting on was smooth. Everything about your analysis was unbelievably smooth. Thanks, Kevin. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. All the best.
Take care. Thank you.
That was
tremendous.
That was so good. I can't believe how good that was. That blew me away. Okay. Before we shut her down here, Ken, we probably have to do this quick. But if there's a wish list that remains for you, if you were to be the general manager of the Winnipeg Jets in free agency, who remains on your list?
Yeah, I mean, they got to get a forward that, needs some complementary scoring and some guys that are tougher to play against. And I know Kevin Cheveldayoff kind of dismissed my question saying it was more about the style. But, I mean, you got to get a guy who is willing to play a physical style, too, in order to be harder to play against. And that's not to say everyone has to run their other guys out of the rink. But you got to find the next Mason Marchment. You don't have to you don't have to pay big dollars for the current one, then go out and find the next one. I mean, if that were easy to do, everyone would do it. But something like that, I think there's got to be another forward to be added to the kind of middle six group, and maybe it's a fourth line guy. I mean, we know Nick Delorier went to the Philadelphia Flyers. I'm not saying that he was a perfect fit, but somebody like that. One quick thing, I know that some folks were asking about Kevin Stenland. I do have a scouting report from him that I was able to get from one of the Cleveland Monsters coaches. Yesterday, very solid two-way center who was good on draws and defended well. Dangerous wrist shot when he gets his release off. Pace of play and consistent battle level slowed him down this past year, but he had a knee issue that contributed to those things. Normally known as a guy with a very high compete level. Also raved about him as a person and believes that he can get another shot at the NHL level. So whether he's in the mix for a fourth-line role or more of a depth guy, we'll see. Waiters mentions Nino Niederreiter. I think Nino is a guy who would be interesting. He's obviously got lots of experience in the division with the Minnesota Wild. Might be out of the Jets' price range, but definitely think that would be a possibility too. Maybe if they're looking for more of a scoring winger. But Dylan Strome is a guy who I mentioned in my list. We'll see. It's an interesting time, and I think that a few more possibilities will open up. There are going to be people that are become available because they're going to be in a similar situation to the Jets, Sean. Teams that are close to the ceiling are going to be looking at moving people around. So are the Jets going to be able to find one of those guys on the not on the scrap heap, but on the availability list? We'll have to see. One thing we also talked about, Sean, and having seen him in the Stanley Cup final, Alex Killorn. With the Tampa Bay Lightning making all those long-term signings that they did, we know he has a no-trade or limited no-trade clause. Would Alex Killorn be a guy that's available? Because what we've said numerous times, and the thing that we love about the Andre Palat signing by the New Jersey Devils, Sean, if you're trying to get back to being a winner, bring in guys who have won. And to me, Alex Killorn went through a tough go in the playoffs. There's no doubt about that. Didn't score a single goal. But he does a lot of little things well, and he's a consistent performer. So I would say that he'd be a guy that, not necessarily for the Jets, but I think he may be available at some point here over the next little while. And again, Sonny Milano is a guy I mentioned earlier on in the show, Comet. I think he's a guy who's interesting. He's got some high-end skill, can score. But, we'll see what happens. We'll see what's out there. And like I said, the Jets are going to upgrade their forward group. It's a matter of when and how, but I do see that happening. And like you said, Kevin Woodley, just an incredible guest. I love the fact that he came on, and for a lot of, I think he would have alleviated the fears of some folks who were like, well, why did the Jets get David Riddick? He basically told you why, and he told you what he needs to do in order to succeed. So thanks again to Kevin. That was fantastic. And we've talked about this off air, Sean. This 5-block show was really something we were super excited about when we put it together. The response from our audience has just been absolutely tremendous, and we thank you for checking it. Whether you checked it out on podcast or live, it's just been absolutely phenomenal to see the support. And for Sean and myself, the fact that we were able to bring you some of those shows from being on the site and being on the scene, I think was really something that was important for us to show our commitment level as well.
Well said, Ken. Well said. Just before we do go, I'll add, I still like the idea of Antoine Roussel or Matthias Janmark. I don't know how the Jets fit any of these guys with their finances the way that they are. And the one last thing to talk about, just, I thought for me the most interesting thing that came out of free agency day yesterday was Kevin Cheveldayoff saying that he's comfortable bringing the room back as it existed last year, or the core of that room. I know you are still a big believer that Blake Wheeler will be moved. I'm still firmly in the I'll believe it when I see it camp. I think we've talked enough to know how we've talked about certain issues in this show enough to know how I feel about the idea of just bringing the same thing back over and over in situations like that. I think it's a tough scenario. But it is what it is. We'll see how that plays out. What's that, Kim?
Sorry, Kim Sawchuk. Sorry, that's for you. I don't think that you were comparing him to Evander Kane. No, you were just using an example of a player who was ready to...
Of a player who did not want to be here. Kim may make a good point in that, it's unlikely, and you made this point, that PLD is going to be the destructive force that Evander Kane was. I still don't think it's an ideal situation by any means. Right before we go, I do have to say, T. Will, I think it was, said something about, here he says, I have to concede that Renny was right all last year when he kept saying we needed to trade PLD, a rare hit by Renny. I know you're trying to give me credit for a rare hit. I don't remember once suggesting that they trade Pierre-Luc Dubois last season. So whatever credit you're giving me, it is not deserved credit. So I'm right back to being... over in your books there, T. Will. One last thing before we do go, I wanted to thank both Winnipeg Sports Talk and Bonfire Sports for sending traffic in our direction. We're trying to build a little bit of a network. We all work together. We all appreciate the heck out of each other. Bomber, Darren Bombing is one of my favorite people in this local market and in this business. The guy earned my trust. I won't get into the story, but he earned trust with me the very first time I met him in a way that he didn't have to. I appreciate the hell out of the guy. He's a great guy. And to reiterate what Ken was saying, we did this 5-show block. We are blown away by the response that we've got from everyone. We're blown away by the support by our sponsors. This has just been so good. It's made us kind of decide we want to try and make sure that we keep a little bit more of a presence during the summer instead of, kind of shuttering things like we did last year for the summer. So we're going to get back and try and bring you some more shows in August to keep you involved so that we can hit the ground running. We can all hit the ground running together come hockey season starting in September. So thank you so much for your support. It means a ton. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. If you haven't liked, hit the like button. Really appreciate everything. Thank you so much, everybody. Hope you enjoy the summer or the next couple of weeks before we get back.